Judge Habhab, I'm very happy to be here. Of course, I'm Tom Tarbox. We've known each other for quite a while. Today is March 25th, 2016. We're here today at the Webster County Courthouse to have a little conversation and to create a record, an oral history of your service to the state and to the bar. And I really appreciate your being here and giving us your time.
Well, I thank you invited me, Tom.
Certainly. Judge, I'd like to start because I know that your family history is of great interest, and I think at a time in our current polity when we have some issues about immigration and so forth, that you may have an instructive story. So could you please tell us about your family, your parents, I guess?
It was in the early 1900s. My mom and dad, if they weren't in their teens, they were not many years beyond their teens. They migrated to this country from Lebanon. They came with little more than a little satchel and little clothing that they could carry in a little bag. My dad came first. They were married over in Lebanon. My mother refused to leave her home and to go to a country that they knew little, if anything, about. But so Dad came alone and somehow ended up here in Fort Dodge. They were real guarded on their past. We didn't ever talk about it a lot. Whatever we learned was fragmented at best. But Dad came here to Fort Dodge and established himself for perhaps a year to 2 years, and then went back to Lebanon. And my mom then consented to join him here in America. They came by boat. That's the one part that Mom would talk about. It must have been where they got the money to come by boat. They wouldn't ever say, but they. Mom would always tell what a terrible trip it was by boat, and I suspect that they were back in the hold, some undistinguished section of the boat. But then they passed through Ellis Island, and that's registered. Their names are registered in there. And the Dad got employment, I believe, in the coal mines before he came to Fort Dodge. What brought him here, as I said, I'm not ever sure, and I don't think he ever did say.
Where were the coal mines?
Pardon?
Where were the coal mines?
Well, I think it was down in Pennsylvania. They somehow he found out that they needed labor there, and a young man, he volunteered, and that's where he ended up. But judging from what he said, and which was absolutely very, very little, he wasn't cut out to do coal mining, and I'm not sure what brought him to Fort Dodge. I really can't say.
Well, I understand that there are other families of Lebanese descent here in Fort Dodge.
Yes, there are the Daniels, the Zakirs, there were the Head-Eds. There were a number of them. I'm not just sure who came first. Okay. Although I do know, I think Dad did tell me once that the Daniel, the Daniel Tire Company now, that they were here in Fort Dodge. Dad told me that he was stranded in Ackley, some little town that it stopped by train, and whether he ran out of money or was just asking, or the conductor was asking, where are you going? Dad did say that he told him that he knew the Daniel family here in Fort Dodge, and somehow or other the train master arranged for him to come the rest of the way by train here to Fort Dodge.
I understand that your parents did not speak English when they immigrated.
No, Mom and Dad could neither read or write or speak, well, either read or write English. They had, as near as I know, they had little, if any, schooling in Lebanon. But no, they did not. At home, they spoke most of the time Arabic. My father, however, entered the business world, and he did. He was pretty good, quite fluent in English. Yeah, he learned a lot of the phrases from farmers that probably I wouldn't want to repeat here, but that he learned some of those phrases that the farmers used. And but my father was such an enterprising man. Maybe we'll cover that a little later as to what he accomplished during his lifetime. Sure. Coming from absolutely nothing in Lebanon, came into Fort Dodge with nothing more than a little pack. It was just a...
Well, go ahead and go in there. I did read some information here about he was a peddler.
He was a peddler. And he started out, I'm not just sure who it was that who it was that befriended him, but he gathered the needles and threads and dry goods, sundry items like that, and walked from farmhouse to farmhouse, selling his wares. I forget he was designated as a peddler. I forget the fellow's name from the Des Moines Register who interviewed, and he used the word peddler, so I used it after that. But that's what he did, and then he was befriended. When I entered the mayor's office here in Fort Dodge, I got, and I still have several of them, letters from farmers where Dad stayed overnight. And one letter in particular would tell, yes, we let your father stay in the barn. He could sleep in the barn at night. And another one would come in and get another letter. Well, you remember your dad real well. He talked about his family, and he would stay at our home. Or they would invite him in for dinner. One farmer around Pomeroy wrote me a letter and said, yeah, I remember your father real well. He had a team of horses and a wagon, and he would leave his horses and his wagons at our farm on Friday or Saturday and go home for the weekend, and then come back and pick up his team, and off he'd go. But Dad had to have some measure of success in that area, because then he did have a tire shop. We call it a tire shop. He sold tires in a building here in Fort Dodge, and did that. He then rented a filling station. He ended up with 2 filling stations. We're now getting, I would guess, in the late mid-30s, late 30s. My father then decided he went into the trucking business. He had 5 trucks on the road, and I was a young man. I did take to my mother's anger, I can't find a better word than that. I did drive one of the semi-trucks up to Minnesota, and I had license, and I was about 16 years old. I didn't come home at night, and my mother and Dad happened to come home, and we came with me, and my mother let in my father, like, I don't know, but I never took another route. But okay. My 2 brothers, we'll go into that, but my 2 brothers helped my father in the trucking business. When the war started, however, Dad was so dependent upon us children, and more particularly my 2 brothers, that he had to shut down the filling station and the trucking business. This would surprise you, but my father at that time had more trucks on the road than Decker had. Decker was in its infancy.
Okay, Judge, if I can pause you for just a second, I want to cover a couple of things. I want to come back to the point that you just made. If Arabic was sort of the language that your parents spoke at home, I assumed you learned to speak Arabic.
Regrettably, I didn't, but I understood it. I think all of us, I don't think any of us kids spoke Arabic, but we all understood our parents and our aunts and uncles when they would speak it. Most of the time, they would have their own private conversations, and I'm not sure what it was they were talking about, and maybe it's just as well, but because they always ended up in laughter and giggling, and like couples do.
Sure.
But no, us kids, we never did speak. Now, my parents couldn't write either. They couldn't write English or Arabic. They had, that's another story about when my mother was notified my brother wouldn't be coming home. So that's another story. It's kind of interesting.
Well, let me ask another question. Did your parents have a particular faith background? I mean, people might assume that because they're from Lebanon, they were Muslim.
My parents were Muslims, yes. And my father, not so much. My mother, but we didn't practice the religion. It was just a fact. We had there weren't any mosques here in Fort Dodge, or in, I guess, state of Iowa. I'm not sure that my father would have been that interested, but my mother was. My mother adhered rather religiously to it. Now, us kids didn't follow the Muslim religion. I shouldn't say that all of us didn't. Some said did. I think my one sister and one brother, but my the oldest brother, I would assume adhered to the Catholic religion. That would be my, and I'm only guessing, and it's because I know my oldest brother's a medical doctor. Incidentally, it's another story.
Yeah, I want to get into your siblings here. Do you recall what city in Lebanon your parents came from?
Kadfarhona, and that's a little village not too far from Beirut, nestled in the hills of Lebanon. My sister Mary, and that was another story about Mary, but my sister Mary did go there, and I think she's the only member of our family.
She went back to live in Lebanon?
Yeah, well, my sister Mary married a scientist who was charged with the responsibility of developing a communication system among the Arab countries. So they did live in Lebanon for a year or two. I don't recall how long. But as soon as the Civil War broke out in Lebanon, I forget the year, they were in the midst of it, and they came on home. I called them once in Lebanon because I'd watched TV, and I saw what they were doing, and I called my sister. I said, "Would you please come on home and get out of that godforsaken country?"
Do you still have cousins?
Well, I would assume, but not any that we're communicating with.
Well, you mentioned several siblings. How many children were in your family?
My mother had 9 children.
Okay.
2 of them died in infancy, and then my brother Oscar was killed in World War II.
So how many brothers and how many sisters?
Well, I had the 4 brothers and then the 2 sisters. Then the first one was killed, and my one sister just died a month or so ago.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Where did you live in Fort Dodge? Where did your family live?
We lived in we have a home. We had lived on 9th Avenue North in that particular section of town. And my father, as I say, was an ingenious guy. Every time and I don't remember it, but I do remember the additions. He bought this home, and every time as the family grew, he built on little rooms for the home itself.
And what year were you born?
I was born in 1925.
I assume you went to high school here in Fort Dodge?
Went to high school here at Fort Dodge, and 2 years at the old junior college.
Okay. Where was the high school when you went to high school?
Well, the high school was it's now vacant now, and it was there at about 11th, 10th Street and 5th Avenue North, somewhere in there. Mm-hmm.
Is that what used to be called, I think, North Junior High when I was going to high school here?
No, it was high school. North Junior High is still intact.
Okay.
But it was the old high school that was later abandoned, and the new hospital or the new high school was built then out in the eastern part of Fort Dodge.
Do you have any recollections of high school that you'd like to share with us?
As I said, when my father, when World War II started, the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. My brothers enlisted in the service. That meant that the stations, things that I did or helped out on, left me with a little, if anything, to do. We serviced the vehicles at the Gold Bar Creamery. And the Gold Bar Creamery was up there on 12th Street. And they delivered milk. And this is when milk was delivered to the homes. Rosedale, you may recall, had horses that would deliver milk. And the Gold Bar Creamery had a little van, had trucks, good trucks, nice trucks. There, Mrs. Danker's son had a route, and he went into the Army. She came into the station one day, we were getting ready to shut it down, and I was, I think, I would guess 16 or 17, and she wanted to know if I wanted a job. And I said, well, I'm not sure, what is it? And she said, well, my son is leaving. We have this route in the eastern part of town for delivery of milk. You deliver milk in the morning. Would you be interested? And I will pay you $13 a week. And that, I said, well, I'd have to ask my father. That's in those days when you had to ask your dad what to do. And I asked my dad if I could have this job. And he said, well, do you feel like you want to do it? And I said, well, yeah, she's going to pay me $13 a week, and which was really more money than I'd ever dreamed of having. My father said, you can have it as long as you keep your grades up. If you falter in your grades, he didn't use the word falter, but it is, if your grades break down, you got to quit. And I said, that's okay. That was a 7-day-a-week job at the time. I would be up at 4, 5 o'clock, deliver milk, come home. My father had breakfast for me. We'd have breakfast together. I'd clean up, and then I'd go to school. And yeah, that's what I did until, maybe 6 or 7 months before I went into the Army.
You mentioned the Depression, and I guess I'd just be curious about your observations about the Depression era here in Fort Dodge.
Well, the Depression affected everyone. It affected our family. The one thing I noticed, and I was about maybe 10 years old, my father was home more than he'd ever been. There wasn't any work. We mother did almost all the cooking, and from vegetables that my father grew in the garden, and vegetables in the wintertime that they preserved for winter use. She canned up to 100 quarts of various vegetables for the family. We had a room in our basement for those goods. I'm not sure how to describe it. I don't think at the time that that I knew, or that we knew we were poor. I don't think that we were ever at that stage where we'd ever talk about being poor. We didn't have a lot of things that others had, but we somehow we were a pretty close knit family, but we didn't have a lot, but we had all we needed. I think that's the best thing. Listen, when Mother says it's time to eat, we sat down and eat, and you daresn't leave anything in the plate. She said, you'd finish your meal, and
you didn't negotiate what you got.
No, you didn't. No, no, you didn't.
You mentioned that your father had these gas stations, and I know during the Depression there was quite a bit of rationing. Would that be part of the reason that the gas stations were not?
Well, rationing came. My father had the gas station, and I can still see the sign, 6 gallons for $1. And gas was selling then for 18 cents, 16 cents, 17 cents a gallon. Gas rationing then came in a little later after we had shut down. And there were stamps. You got regular stamps, and they were rationed out. But this was true about everything, tires. And I was working for the Gold Bar Creamery that we had. She seemed to have all the stamps she wanted. And
you mentioned too that your father operated several trucks, and Fort Dodge has quite a reputation as a trucking area. There's Smithway and Decker, and I remember the old Brady family had quite a transportation business. How did your father get into that kind of trucking?
I'm not certain, except I think that there was a Bill Johnson, I believe his name was, who had the Budweiser dealership here in Fort Dodge, and I'm not sure how it was that my father and Mr. Johnson came in to got acquainted, but they started out. That's where he started out. Was somehow he must have convinced my dad to get a semi truck and go to St. Louis and get the beer, bring it back to Fort Dodge. So that's how he got started. Did my dad do the driving? No. My 2 older brothers teamed up and did that.
Sure. Yeah. You mentioned earlier Pearl Harbor. What's your recollection of where you were and how that information was received at that time?
Well, I was a young man, and at that stage you were really, you'd be seen and not heard, so I don't know that I ever expressed myself in that particular area. But I do recall December 7th, 1941, as though it was yesterday. We were all, the older guys were huddled around this radio. This was all pre-TV days. They were all huddled around the radio, and I was wondering what in the world, we didn't know anything about newspapers or anything like that, but what was going on? And they said, well, Japan has attacked Pearl Harbor. And everyone wondered, now where in the world is Pearl Harbor? And then Japan came in and into the conversation, and we did, from geography, we knew a little bit about Japan, just kind of a little country. The theme at that time was, well, this can't last very long. Japan's just a little old country. Musicals came out, and like Goodbye, Dear, I'll be back in a year, I'm in the Army now. Songs like that predominated the radio. It was, these songs kind of told everything about what was going on. But we learned more about it, of course, as the war progressed. And then as the guys started volunteering, the Mom and Dad, of course, was worrying about my older brothers and how they were going to be affected. My next to the oldest brother joined the Navy, and then the third one later on joined the Naval Air Corps, and served in that. Now my oldest brother, I think by then was I know he was out of med school, so he didn't have to serve till later on.
Okay. And then, who's the second brother? You said you had two older brothers. The oldest one, who's the doctor, what's his name?
Hamod.
Hamod, okay.
And the next one would have been my brother Hassan. He was my father's right hand and left hand. And he was the guy we always looked to for guidance, I guess, for the lack of a better word. He was just the most, I just can't describe the guy enough. The young Kirsten did an article on him and his children and what he did. He's raised 5 children. Got 1, 2, 3 of them are lawyers. One's a doctor. And one's was a stone's throw away before she married of getting her CPA.
Okay.
Yeah. So he was wonderful.
Okay. Now, you did enlist in the Army, as I understand it.
I was drafted.
You were drafted. Okay. And how old were you when you were drafted?
I was 18. I turned 18 in September. I was still in high school. So they let me, along with a number of others of my age, stay until we graduated. Well, there were a group of us that had enough credits to graduate right or wrong, good or bad, in January.
Okay.
So I graduated January 21st of 1944, and I went into the Army on January 25th of that same year.
Okay. And you were drafted into the Army?
I was drafted into the Army, yeah.
And where did you go for basic training?
I took basic training in Camp Croft, South Carolina, a 17-week training. I'd never fired a rifle before. My father and Mom didn't like guns around the house. I didn't even know anything about it, but anyway, I took basic training down in Camp Croft, South Carolina. I think 17 weeks. Well, then I came home on furlough for a week or two. Then I went was stationed down to Camp Shelby in Mississippi. Okay. And I was there for a month or two, and then I was transferred to Fort Jackson, South Carolina, where I joined the 87th Infantry Division, the division I was stationed with and served with in France and Germany later that year.
So, how is it that you got from America to Europe? I assume on a troop transport?
Yeah, we went over on the Queen. We went over without escort. We were kept abreast of what was going on and what to expect. But the final one was the Queen. We were told that we would not have any escort of any kind. There weren't any battleships that escorted the Queen. Why? because it supposedly it was faster than any of the German submarines. At that time, the Germans were with their submarines were really invoking horrible casualties from other countries. So we hurriedly went across the ocean and landed in Scotland. Now we didn't know where we were going. Actually, I had no idea. Everything was real hush hush. I thought, well, actually, when I was down in Mississippi, that I'd be going to the South Pacific, but instead I joined the 87th.
How many troops would have been on that ship?
Well, I think our entire division. I hesitate to guess the number of troops. I just am not that well informed, really, to even venture a guess. All I can tell you, a lot.
A lot.
A lot.
Were there other people from Fort Dodge with you?
I didn't know it at the time, but Jerry Coughlin, I don't know if you remember Jerry or not. Jerry was the Webster County recorder for years, double amputee.
Sure,
yeah.
sure.
And Jerry was with the 87th, but that's another story. I can tell you about that a little later.
Okay, so you get to Scotland, and so how long are you there, and where do you go from there?
Well, we weren't in Scotland. There were trucks waiting for us in Scotland. We loaded immediately into these army trucks, and they took us down to England.
Okay.
I forget the name of it was a camp in England. I forget the name of the town, Ipswich, if that sounds familiar. We were transported down to England, or to this camp. We were there about, I would guess, 4 or 5 weeks, along training every day, and then we got orders that we were moving out. We had transports came, picked us up, took us down to Southampton, and from there we boarded our ship and went over to Europe.
So you crossed the English Channel?
Crossed the English Channel.
And landed in France, I assume?
We crossed the English Channel in pretty good-sized boats, and none of us really knew well, we knew where we were going, obviously, by that time. We landed at Le Havre, France. There was another. The ship was a big ship. We encountered no difficulties. And then there were these other little crafts. We got off this and went down to these crafts at beach. The front comes down. So yeah, that's how we got to Le Havre. And Le Havre was secure at that time. It was beat up real bad because of the bombing that had taken place several months prior to that. But that's where we were. We had no resistance at all. We grouped there. We went to another town and bivouacked, as I recall, for a day or two. And then we were transported close to Metz. And we were at our division, not our company, but our division took the last stronghold in Metz. So then we went on and we were to this big courtyard. I don't think I remember about it. We hadn't had a decent meal for some time, and I do recall this big vat with water in it and fire underneath it, and we had these sea rations in it. So you could have the sea rations for your meals, which was all right. I mean, it wasn't at the time. That was the thing, and that was our meal. Now we were at Metz for probably a day or two, maybe 2 days, before the trucks came and transported us then up to the front lines.
Okay. At that time, where were the front lines?
it was somewhere, we were still, I think, a little bit yet in France, and I should have brought the book with me. I frankly hadn't the slightest idea where we were, and I really could care less. Before we left Metz, Paul Thibodeau, who was a good Roman Catholic, the priests were there to counsel us, and Paul said, Alice, why don't you come with me? I said, where are you going? Well, I'm going to go see the priest. And you want to come along? And I said, well, sure. And I went along, and I'm going to tell you, he was just a marvelous fellow. And I've always been partial to the priest and Monsignor since then. He was the most understanding guy I ever knew. And we talked about things that we had never discussed before. Death. You understand death. You understand your chances of surviving are not very good. He was real frank, real good, real understanding. And then from then we went back, of course, and we all boarded. We're all cleanly shaven, dressed real clean, and put us in these trucks and up to the front lines. We went. Now the truck drivers would only go so far, and then they would let us out. And I think it was the 25th or 26th Division was coming back. We were going up this road. They were coming back this way, all beat and haggard, and oh goodness gracious, I can still see them. One guy had to ask, how was it up there? And one of them said, you'll find out soon. Yeah. We went a little while later, half a mile later perhaps, and the Germans saw us, and that was our first experience. They laid in a barrage with their 88s. And I'm going to tell you, all of us hit the ditch, and all of us were so clean, and it came out. Oh yeah, when the bombing stopped, and we all got back up on the road again. But yeah, and we were just as miserable looking as the 25th or 26th were when they were coming back from the line.
So how long were you in Europe?
Well, I was there. I was in France. I was taken off the front lines in just before Christmas of 1944. I was taken by ambulance to Paris, France, and I was housed in this big dormitory effect, and the guys were lined up in cots for I think a day or so, 2 days perhaps. And then I was flown to England, to a hospital unit in England. And I was in England then until I think June or July, when that was after the war in Europe ended. Okay. And I didn't go back. I didn't go back to the front lines. I wasn't. I was classified as not able to go back. Okay. So I didn't have to go back.
So, backing up a little bit, in the preparation for this, I read through the proceedings of your retirement at the Court of Appeals, and I learned about a specific incident that you were involved with on the front lines. I'm trying to get a time frame in my mind for when that incident happened, and I think you know about that. It was in December of 1944 and involved a comrade named
Kingsbury. Well, it was December 16th, 1944. Our squad was on the front lines, and I would guess in Germany. We'd had no problems as far as moving concerned. We would take villages. There was some casualties, but not a lot. Our squad was ordered to take this hill. So we, as I say, I think most of us at the time felt rather secure, and we started out. There was, I think, 7 or 8 of us, and we got about in the middle of the field, and the Germans saw us, and they laid down their barrage. We scattered to a ditch, and 4 of us made it, myself and 3 others. Kingsbury was behind us with the BAR, and this was the heavy weapons of the squad. I believe the Germans let us go and concentrated on Kingsbury. We made it. I don't know what happened to the guys behind him. I never did find out. But Kingsbury got shot up, and he's out there in the middle of the field and crying, "I don't want to die, I don't want to die." He kept hollering for somebody, "Please come and help me, help me." And there wasn't any officers around. There weren't any commissioned or non-commissioned officers around. And so I told the other guys if they would concentrate their fire in the event the Germans started shooting, if they would concentrate their fire up there, I would go get Kingsbury. So I started out, and crawling out, I got rid of everything, my pack, and I kept my rifle and my ammunition, and crawled out to Kingsbury. Well, I got to him without any problems. But then the Germans saw us, and I said, "Kingsbury, lay still, I'll get you out of here. But you gotta lay still." But the guy was in horrible pain, crying, and I said, "Lay still, maybe they'll think we're dead." And finally, I did settle him down, and the Germans stopped firing, and I threw his arm over mine. We crawled back, and about midway, the Germans again saw us, and I don't know if you've ever been around guns, but you could hear the zing of the bullets. You could feel the sting of them, and somehow we made it to the other guys. Well, the captain came. Incidentally, our captain and our 2 lieutenants were killed. The captain came and said, "Who got Kingsbury?" And they said, "Habhab got him." So he came over and said, "You get Kingsbury?" I said, I guess I got him, I don't know. And Kingsbury was a good-sized fellow to carry the BAR. And he said, "Well, you can take him back."
Oh.
Yeah, so I took, he could walk, and I could still feel he'd be a pretty good sized guy, and his shoulders, his arm around my shoulders. And we walked back to the hospital unit, and I dropped him off there, and went back to, started back to where my squad was. And the Germans saw me, and opened fire once again, and I, of course, hit the ground and laid there. But they kept firing, and I think it was the P-47, and I was telling Dick Schlegel, Judge Schlegel, who was on the court with me, who was a pilot in World War II and flew them, and I think somehow he rather doubted me, and I said, "I'm going to tell you what this." He said, "Well, how do you know?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. I know he was shooting, but he said, "How do you know that?" And I said, "Well, because there were tracer bullets, and I could see where the tracer bullets were going." He said, "Oh, by golly, you're right, because every 4th or 5th round in the machine guns was a tracer bullet."
Wow.
So I went back to where I thought my squad was, but I suspect the Germans had taken charge about that time. And I went back to where I could find Americans, and I joined, I asked the captain there, I don't know how it was that I ran into him, but he, I wanted to know where my captain was, and he said, well, we're not quite sure, but you stay here with us. And so I stayed with them until I was taken out.
Is there a town that other people might identify as the location of this battle?
Yes. Saarbrücken, I remember. I don't remember, there was, we took this one town. And when I say we took it, actually, it was more of the artillery. The artillery would lay down a pretty good barrage for us, and then we'd come in. And I don't know the town. And one thing I'm proud about, I'm not so proud about some of the things I had to do, but I'm more proud of one thing that I didn't do, even though I was ordered to do it. We took this one, we're moving to this one little town, and Habhab, yeah, there's Germans in that hut, house, whatever it was, get them out. So I says, okay, and I went to this place. Ordinarily, we would throw a hand grenade in, and I didn't. I opened the door, and I could still see him huddled in this little corner. There was this old fellow and his wife hugging each other. Mm-hmm. They couldn't understand me, and I couldn't understand them, I'm sure. But I didn't throw the grenade in, and I shut the door. And anything going on? I said, no, nothing's going on. And we went on. But I always remember, yeah, the one good thing I did do. Yeah. That's, I didn't throw in the grade. And hand grenade, I killed him, I would have. Sure as I'm sitting here.
So, you know, as far as your infantry duty, I mean, I'm sort of understanding it was a fairly concentrated but horrific event of marching across and liberating these towns. And
that's as good a way to describe it as any. Most a good time. Sometimes we didn't have much opposition. I think the day that Kingsbury got shot up, I think that was one of those days. We'd moved up, we dug in. It didn't. I don't think any of us were that. I don't think any of us were fearful. We were having such not marginal success. We were having so much success, and the artillery would make it so darn a lot easier for us guys. And but then,
so following this conversation with the priest that you related earlier, and you did mention that you lost a brother during the war. Was that prior to this, your experience in the war?
Yes. No, it was after.
After, okay.
No, I was in, after I got out of the hospital, I was restationed in England. And the major in charge of the camp was a real nice fellow, and helped me a lot. We had mail call, and this had to be, well, let's see, I would guess May. My brother was killed April 1st, 1945, and I would say probably in May. We had mail call, and I get this big, nice letter, a big fat letter, and I thought, oh boy, that's gonna be good. Nice. Guy opened it up, and then the messenger, my brother had been killed. And yeah, so I didn't really know about it, and this was the era where you not only didn't know where you were going, and if you did know, you didn't dare talk about it. Yeah, he went down with his plane off of Guam, and that's so close to the war, end of the war, and that they didn't. He went with his plane and they didn't find him. Incidentally, you may be interested in this because about the war. I had nothing. My wife would tell me that, you know, you got to get it out of your system about Kingsbury. She said some nights, particularly the early years, I'd be up. She could hear me hollering at night or something like that. I'm not just her how she phrased it, but she kept after me to find Kingsbury, and I did, and it was about the time that I went on to Court of Appeals because I was sitting in my office in Des Moines, and finally I decided, my wife kept after me, and I decided, okay, I'll try and find the guy. We have a national organization, the 87th Division, and I called them. I said, I don't even know his first name, Kingsbury. He was in Company C, 346th Infantry, and I think he is from New York or Massachusetts, somewhere like that. And what's his first name? I had the slightest idea. We were all been called by their last name. And he said, well, we have one Kingsbury. The only Kingsbury we have in your company is Art Kingsbury, and he's in Baltimore. So I took that, got the name, and I went back to came back home and got on the telephone one day, and called the operator in Baltimore and said, I don't know his first name. I told her who I was and what I wanted and why I wanted it. I said, don't disconnect me at any time. She was real nice. She said, well, I understand. I got a husband or a brother or something like that that's been in the military. I want to find him. I said, well, just go down the phone book to Kingsbury and let me talk to whoever answered. So she'd ring the Kingsbury, and I said, this is Albert Habhab. I'm not looking for an Art Kingsbury that was in World War II and was injured. Are you that Kingsbury, or do you know Noah? Went down about the 7th or 8th one. Guy says, answered the phone. He said, well, that sounds like my uncle. But he has an unlisted number, that's why you can't find him. So he gave me a number, and I called the number, and I introduced myself, told me who I was, and I told him who I was looking for, and she says, that's my husband. I said, you're kidding, he's up and around? Yeah, he's coming up the driveway. And it was quite emotional. He comes up the driveway and gets on the phone. Habhab, you know, I never thought I'd ever hear from you again. I said, well, how are you? And he's fine. And his brother had told him that he almost died out there in the field. And we had a real nice conversation. And I didn't know him that well to invite him to my home, and it was, but we did. It was on December 16th of each year. He'd call me or I'd call him, but he'd write me letters, real lengthy letters about what it was like and how happy he was to be alive and all this. I got those letters, and I've kept them only because I've always had the fear people won't believe what I'm telling them. So I got these letters that he said he'll tell you what it was and what his brother said. And I always wanted to, I always wanted to meet somewhere, some neutral place. We never did. He was diabetic and eventually lost a leg and then died. So we never did get together. But what does that have to do with the Court of Appeals? Nothing, except that's where I found out through the long distance operator, or through my division where Kingsbury was. Yeah. Sorry to sidetrack. I didn't mean to sidetrack you.
That's great.
That's 50 years later.
Yeah, that's remarkable. Well, coming home from Europe then, I'm sure that was a great relief. And did you come back on a boat?
That was terrible.
Oh, it was?
That was terrible trip. The Queen was all right. We came back home on one of those Kaiser Liberty ships. And it was one of those, it was absolutely 7 or 8 days or 9 days of torture. As a matter of fact, I said, if you got something going back to England, put me on. As much as I wanted to go home, put me on to get me off of this thing. I was sick, just deathly sick all the time. And it was, at night, you were going up and down so much in the kitchen dishes and metal plates where you could hear them clanging all over the place. But boy, once we got sight of the Statue of Liberty, it was a relief. Yeah, it was really a relief.
And you came home after VE Day?
Yeah, I came home after, I came home after the war in Europe ended, after Franklin Roosevelt's death. And the war with Japan ended in August, so I must have gone home in May or June.
And you came to New York City?
Yes, yeah.
And were you in the military for a while after that, or were you immediately out?
No, we were still, when we came home, I think most of us felt that we were going to be assigned to duty to do away with Japan.
Wow.
And so no, I think when I came home, I was on furlough. I was stationed up in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, then down to Fort Worth, Texas, I think. There wasn't much to do after the war with Japan ended, and it was just a matter of time of getting our discharge. Strange as it may seem, and I don't know why, I think he talked me into joining the reserve, but the only reason I joined the reserve, I never did tell my parents what I did, but I could join the Air Corps Reserve, and that was all right. I didn't want to go back to the infantry, and so I did, but I wasn't called. I was in college, so I was never recalled. Now Maury Stark was. I don't know if you know Maury, the attorney here in Fort Dodge. Maury was a captain. He got recalled, but I didn't.
So when you get back to the United States and finish your military duty, I know you went on to college. Did you come back to Fort Dodge for a while first, or did you straight? How did that come about?
Well, I came back to Fort Dodge, got my discharge, and there was an article in the paper that I was home, and I got a phone call from the manager at the Gold Bar Creamery, and I'm an old man by then. I'm 20 years old, and he came. We'd like to talk to you about coming to work for us, and can we stop by your home? I says, well, yeah, I'll stop by. And he said, we're looking for a manager to manage the Gold Bar Creamery. We'd like to give you the job, and we'll pay you $50 or $60 a week. Wow! And I thought that was pretty good. Well, my father, God love him, came home, and they were just leaving. My father says, what those men want? I said, they offered me this job at Gold Bar Creamery, and they're going to pay me $60 a week. And he says, what'd you tell him? I said, well, I told him I'd think about it. He said, well, you call him up and tell him you're not going to take the job. You're going to go to college. That was my dad, yeah. So I called him up and said, I can't take the job. Even though I'd been over to Europe, I'd been away from home a couple of years, but he had a good way of doing it. Now, he wasn't a real domineering guy. He was just a gentle sort of way, he'd say that, yeah. now you're going to have to go to college. He wanted me to go to med school. That was probably the only time we didn't see eye to eye. He wanted me to join my older brother. And I didn't care much for medicine. I don't think I told him till I entered law school that I was going to go to law school. But he was okay.
So you went to undergraduate school, I think, at the University of Iowa?
Yes, I did 2 years here, and then
Oh, you mentioned that, 2 years at the
University of Iowa. Yeah.
Okay. And what did you study as an undergraduate?
I got my BA degree in political science.
Okay.
And at that time, your first year in law school could apply to your fourth year for your Bachelor of Arts degree. So I think it was a combination. So I went to law school, then I got my first year, then I got my BA.
Did you go to school on the GI Bill?
Oh yes, yeah.
And what did that mean to people of your era?
Well, I think it meant a lot to guys of my generation, particularly if you didn't come from an extremely wealthy family. The government paid our tuition, bought our books, and gave us I don't know, $60 or $70 a month or something like that. No, it was a real godsend. It was something that we all of us that were in college at that time took advantage of. Yeah.
And then you went to law school?
Yes.
Also at the University of Iowa?
Yes.
And what year did you graduate from law school?
I graduated in 1952. 1952. Mm-hmm.
At what point did you get married? Was that?
We got married in 1953, I think.
Okay, so after law school.
After law school.
Okay.
1953. I don't want my wife to hear, I think.
No, that's all right. We'll cut that out.
But yeah, we've been married 63 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and your wife's name is Janet?
Right.
And was she someone you knew in Fort Dodge or someone you met in college?
We met in college, and we met in college, I think in probably my junior year, maybe in law school. We hit it off right off the bat, and I didn't. I think, but my wife was in law school or in Iowa City, in college there too. Well, her grandmother was sick. My wife's an only child, so she went home. My father-in-law was a dentist. Janet went home. They wanted her to come home to help take care of grandma. So she pulled out of school and went home and attended to the needs of her grandmother. We saw each other, obviously. Then, 1953, we married.
Where was Janet from?
Elkader, up there in northeast Iowa, little town in northeast Iowa in Clayton County, not too far from the Mississippi River and not too far from McGregor, which was on the Mississippi. Lovely little community.
Where did you get married? Was that here in Fort Dodge or in Iowa City?
No, we married in Elkader.
In Elkader, sure. Okay. You mentioned 63 years. You have a couple of children, as I understand?
We have a boy and a girl. You know, we have 2 children.
And who are they and what do they do?
Well, my daughter is married and has 2 children and 4 grandchildren. My son is in Fort Dodge, never married. He has a degree in counseling. I can't think of there's a better name for it. He has that degree. He worked out the Boys Ranch.
Oh, yes.
For I think 7 or 8 years. During the time off from there, he did volunteer work at the hospital. Then he decided to get a nursing degree. And then, so he had credits from Buena Vista that it would apply. I'm not just sure, but he did get a nursing degree, and qualified, and took the state board of whatever nurses take, and worked out at Friendship Haven, and was in charge of the Alzheimer's ward for some 13 years. But he came in to me one day and said, "Dad," I said, "What?" I quit. I said, "Did what?" I said, "I quit." "Now, you never married." And but he said, "I can't go it anymore." And I think that was kind of the beginning of a guy who has a masterful mind and kind of, well, a real nice guy. And that's another story. I'll tell you that sometime, but not on this.
So I'd like to turn, if we could, to your early years practicing law. And did you start practicing law in Fort Dodge?
Yes, I graduated from law school, and the only offers I could get, one was from the FBI, and the other was from insurance companies. And the most that they would pay was $200 a month, and I forget what the FBI paid. We had one of our mates did go with the FBI and was talking to me about doing it, and I said, I really don't want to. I searched around for a job, and with not even marginal success, with no success at all. And my brother Hassan, God bless him, I used his car. I think I got tired of my using his car all the time, but to go to various places that interviewed for jobs, and I didn't care for any of them. None of the offers that were made were of any great moment. And my brother said, "Well, why don't you set up practice here in Fort Dodge?" And I thought about it a while, and I said, "Well, I didn't intend to, but why not?" So he helped me get started, and got furniture and rented an office and put my name on the door. And
You literally hung out your own shingle from the very beginning.
yeah, that's all alone. My first year, I think I took in $800. You probably wouldn't remember, Tobin Business College was here, and I taught up there for additional income. I also taught bankers and negotiable instruments, just for extra money, and went along that way for several years, and was all alone. And I didn't have a secretary. I couldn't afford one, obviously. I don't know if you'd remember Earl Codner, Codner Realty. Earl was probably one of 5 men that played an important part in my life, and getting started at least. He came up and he said, "Al, why don't you come on down to my office?" He was a realtor. And Fred Rosenbaum had died, who was an attorney. And all you'd have to do, you could use, all you had to pay is the rent in the one office. You can use my reception room, you can use my secretary. And the only thing you have to pay would be your own rent on the office space. And I said, "Well, gee, that'd be nice of you." And so I went down with Earl. A real gentleman, always came to work in a blue suit and tie, and well-groomed fellow. And he managed the Snell building.
Okay, sure.
And
Is that where your office was then?
yeah, that's where my office was. Okay. So I was with Earl, and he played cards with Saturday nights with Alan Loth.
Okay.
And Alan was the premier lawyer, I dare say, in the state of Iowa. And Earl says, "Alan wants you to come up with him." And I said, I'm happy here, and we're getting along so well. And 3 or 4 months later, Earl came. Alan told me, if you're not going to come up, he's going to get somebody else. I said, "Earl, I hate to leave you. I know you're not doing very good real estate-wise. I'm in a position now where I can take over the office and the secretaries. He says, don't worry about me. I'm financially fixed. You go on up there with Alan. And dumb me, I don't know why I would hesitate, but so I went up and I talked to Mr. Loth. He says, yes, I want you to come up. And I've done a lot of good things in my life, but that's the smartest thing I ever did. I went on up with Alan Loth, and we had an excellent relationship. Yeah, and he taught me an awful lot.
What kind of work were you doing?
Well, at that time I was doing a lot of real estate development. I started out when I started out like I suspect a lot of young lawyers doing criminal work. And pretty soon I was getting to be too much of a criminal lawyer, and I didn't like it. Well, then I went into the mayor's office, and that gave me a good excuse. Then I would call and say, no, I don't do any criminal work. Because, well, a fellow came in and wanted me to defend him in a rape case, and I had to turn him down, but then he went over to Alan Loth, and Alan took it, but Alan came in and just chewed me out unmercifully. He said, you have a law license, you have an obligation. I said, I realize that, Alan, but you're asking me to cross-examine policemen that I hire. And it just doesn't seem compatible, and that's why I turned it down. Alan seemed to agree with me after I explained to him why I didn't take the case. It just didn't seem that I had policemen that were doing the arresting. I hired those policemen as the mayor, and so I think he understood.
Sure. Judge, you were just talking about your law partner, Alan Loth, and you mentioned that he was a fine lawyer, and we were talking about his expertise in civil procedure. Was he as recognized at that time as he is today?
Oh yes, he published this book, which all of us used. It was, I think, a literary masterpiece. It would tell you how to plead a case. It would tell you what the necessary allegations would be, and for a young lawyer, that was really something. One day, you had to know the gentleman. I recall one day he gets this phone call from the Drake University, and this is Alan telling me this, and they wanted him to do an article on res ipsa. And well, what'd you tell him? He said, I'm going to do it. I said, well, okay. And so he gets a hold of Faye, our secretary. He says, I don't want to be disturbed. I don't care who it is. And that was Alan, real blunt. He said, I don't want you bothering me. And he sat down and he did this law review article on res ipsa locator. And I did it that day, and he brings it in to me the next day to read it. And it really was, I consider it to be a masterpiece, but I'm prejudiced. But he covered the subject, and I just to prove to him that I read it, there's one sentence in it that was real long. I said, well, maybe you ought to shorten up this sentence, Ellen. It's a little too long, it doesn't fit in. Oh, he says, thank you, and he went back, shortened it up, and wrote it back. He was, lawyers from all over the state used to come in and seek his advice. One lawyer in Ames, can't think of his name, a prominent attorney there, was always in his office. I always know when he came in, he'd say to Faye, is God here? And Faye would get all frustrated and say, oh, Mr. Loth is in his office, yes. And but yeah, he was a premier lawyer. He was a lawyer's lawyer, besides being a good lawyer in his own right.
When did you join him?
Well, I was trying to figure that out. It had to be in the mid '60s, late '60s, somewhere in there. And I can't touch it. I can't touch a date. He was a real kind man. He could be ornery when he wanted it. If things didn't come out right for him. But his wife died, And he remained single, and he met this lady who he called one of his childhood sweethearts, and they married. And she was a real fine person, and but she had a family and sons in California that were lawyers. And Alan came in and one afternoon, and whenever he started the conversation out with, "Well, my boy," I knew that something was aglow. And he said, "I'm going to leave the practice." I said, "You going to do what?" "Yeah." I said, "Well, my wife wants to move to California." And he said, "I'm going to leave the practice. It's up to you whether you want to keep it or not." And I was in the mayor's office yet at that time. Well, I said, "Well, can I let you know tomorrow?" And I don't know why I was so dumb to even give it a thought. But the next morning I said, "No, I think I'll keep the office, Alan." He said, "That's good, I'll turn everything over to you." And I said, "No, I owe you something. We got a good set of dollars in equipment here, and in library. Goodness gracious, he had a full library, and everything from Amjur to I don't know what, but it was complete." And he said, "Well, I only want this amount of money." And it was a small figure. It was under $1,000. I said, "Alan, that's not even near what you got in the equipment." He said, "That's all I want now. Don't give me any more than that." I think what he did is he went to his tax returns and figured out the basis of the property, and I can't think of any other way that he arrived at the amount of money. But that he did leave. He left me with the practice. Well, that left me with the real problem, because I had the law practice. We had 2 secretaries, and I think I had the third one part-time, and I was still in the mayor's office. And I had decided then that I couldn't do both, and that's when I decided to give up the mayor's office and stay in there.
Let's talk about your being the mayor. When did you become mayor of Fort Dodge?
I was elected in 1959.
Okay.
And took office in 1960, and remained there for some 14 years. That was under the old system. That's when we had the commissioner and the mayor.
The mayor's position in Fort Dodge is a nonpartisan position, isn't that right? Yeah. Well, how did you reach the decision to run for mayor?
I'm not just sure. I don't think my practice wasn't that big, and I took a kind of an interest in city government a little bit, and no one encouraged me to do so. I just decided one day that the mayor was up for re-election, and said to myself, "Why not?" So I did. And at that time, the cry was, "Well, he's much too young." I was 34, 35, I think. What would that be? I was born in 25 and was elected in 69, 25, that'd be 34. And, they say, "Oh, he's much too young to be mayor." At that time, it was you were mayor when you retired and had nothing else to do. So I don't think anyone encouraged me to do so. I just, it was something that I really wanted to do. And I think there were several of us competing for the job, and I was elected. To inject this into it, they said I was too young to be mayor. When I reached the age of 72, they said I was too old to be a judge. So sandwiched in between there has been a great life.
That's right. Who was the mayor who was running for re-election?
Wonderful fellow. Marv Hedvig was the mayor. I guess that was the only sad part of it. I think Marv needed the job. It paid $8,500 a year, and I think that Marv needed it. I didn't. I wasn't very happy to do it, but it turned out we still remained good friends. It wasn't like it is now, where everybody curses each other and gets violent in their words.
Right.
But Marv came in to me one day, and he said, "Al," I said, "what?" He said, "I want to ask for a re-election, or recounting of the ballots. It can't be right." I said, "Why is that, Marv?" He said, "Where I go, I can't find anyone that didn't vote for me." I said, "Oh, you rascal. You're always welcome here," and I did. Made it welcome.
How long was your term? It was a 2-year term, is that right?
2-year terms.
So every other year you were running for re-election.
Every other year, yeah.
Yeah.
So there's 7 consecutive elections, yeah.
Were there ever any serious challengers to your position as mayor?
I had opposition. I think one. I think I'd have to classify Andy Schill as a serious contender. He was a lawyer, and yeah, I think I would have to say yes. That I had other opposition, but it didn't not of any great concern. But Andy, I think, was a friend of mine. In fact, they wanted me to join their law firm, but at one time, after Alan left, I didn't do so. That was with Howard Hamilton. I don't know if you remember Howard or not. But yeah, so that was that. Now, when I announced that I was not going to seek re-election, I did it in the afternoon, and Walt Stevens, who was the Messenger, the editor of the Messenger, happened to be a good friend, and we decided to do it in the afternoon. And then the Messenger switched to mornings, and it was in the next morning paper. Then in the afternoon, I get a call, and there were petitions circulating asking me to reconsider. And they had a bunch of signatures. So Walt called me. The Messenger wanted to know what I was going to do. And I said, I can't stay on as mayor, so I'll have to once again respectfully decline. So I left the mayor's office, and then practiced law, then the judgeship came up.
So you were the mayor from about 1960 to about 1975? 74. Okay. That was a active time in, I think, societal change. And you and I had talked about a few things. You mentioned something about utilities.
Well, at one time, the city council fixed utility rates. This was pre the utility commission. We, in about 1975, 76, no, I beg your pardon, 1957, and I wasn't in the mayor's office, about 1957, Iowa, Illinois kept wanting rate increase. For some reason, the city council turned them down, so they took us to court, took the city to court. Had this real lengthy, prolonged litigation. Harvey Ulenhoff was the judge and wrote a masterful opinion. The council then had to adjust and granted Iowa, Illinois a pay increase consistent with the court's opinion. Well, then I took office in 1960. In 1961, the utility company wanted a rate increase. I think we probably gave them something. At 62 and 63, and it just kept on and on. They caught me the press caught me at either the right moment or wrong moment. Want to know what I thought about it, and I blurted out and said, well, I was really sick and tired of Iowa, Illinois using Fort Dodge as a testing ground for utility rates. There were other communities in the state of Iowa that they do service, and I would much prefer they'd go there. And lay off Fort Dodge. They went ahead with their suit. I think Judge Kelly was the judge, and the city attorney worked out a settlement. Well, we were still having difficulties, and Joe Coleman came in. Senator Coleman, who was the state representative, came into my office. Al, what are you doing about the commission rates? I said, well, I'm not going to do anything, and I really am tired of fussing with them. And no one here is educated, no one here in town, let alone me, is educated sufficiently to determine good rates from bad rates. When Joe said, Al, we're waiting for you, I said, what are you waiting for me for? Well, we've got this utility bill in committee, and I'm not going to let it come out on the floor until you give us some indication of what Fort Dodge is going to do. Are you going to grant more increases, or what are you going to do? And we've got this utility bill that will solve, we think, your problems, because the Utility Commission will then fix your rates. And I listened to Joe, and I think he brought me a skeleton outline of the bill itself. And I reviewed it. I said, well, can I let you know, Joe? And he said, yeah, let me know. We won't bring it on the floor till you're ready. And I was a guest speaker at Rotary, and I did a little bit of work on the bill itself. And the question was asked me at Rotary what I thought about a utility commission, and the fellow that was asking the question seemed well versed, and he left me with the alternative saying yes or no, and I said, well, yeah, I favor it. And then when I favored it, and Joe called and said, you're going to go ahead with the Utility Commission? I said, yeah, I go ahead. It goes ahead. I won't fuss with it. And so they went ahead, and it eventually passed the Iowa legislature. They would have anyway. I don't mean to leave the inference that I could have blocked it. I could not have. I may have been in a position to delay its consideration by the Iowa legislature. At least that's what Joe told me. But as you know, the Utility Commission is in the headlines now, and I haven't. They're really. One question that I haven't been able to answer in my own mind from a legal standpoint, and I've got 3 lawyers here. How does a private company have the rights of eminent domain? It must be so, because no one has raised it. But that enters my mind, but that's the only thing, yeah.
We may not have a definitive answer for a while.
Well, I know that the Highway Commission has rights of eminent domain, as we all know. The Utility Commission is part of the government. And I would assume that they must, but can they transfer that to a private organization? As the paper says, it may be done. Now, maybe I'm reading it wrong, too. Maybe I may have it factually wrong. I apologize for that.
Well, Judge, I know one of the other issues you dealt with as mayor was urban renewal, and that was a big issue all over the country. How did it impact Fort Dodge?
Well, we had this big flood, I think in about 62 or 63, that the Des Moines River just went wild and cleaned out most of the area down there that we called the flats. And something needed to be done. So I had heard about urban renewal, and they told me that they had used it in Davenport. I believe it was Davenport. And the engineer there in Davenport, Ron Kirshner, would know about it. So I called Ron in this town. Again, it may or may not have been Davenport, but asked him about the urban renewal program, and some interested in it. Can you explain it to me? And he did. Took time, and I said, well, that probably requires an engineer, doesn't it? And he said, yes, but you have an engineer. And I said, no, I don't have an engineer. I have a fellow in charge of the engineering department, but he's not an engineer. So I'll need to find one. And Ron says, well, how about me? And I said, well, fine, are you interested? And he said, yes. Well, why don't you come on up to Fort Dodge and let's talk. So he came up to Fort Dodge, and we had a nice talk, and I introduced him around to some of the guys that he'd be working with, and I hired him. And then we started the urban renewal program, and that covered the flats, as you can see it now. It took out the old homes that were infested with, really were in bad shape. During the process, the people in the affected area were at my office wanting it done. They wanted me to go ahead, and thus there wasn't any controversy as to whether I should or didn't. And it went to a vote. We had about the people. We had that program, and then I had a downtown program that I included in it, two separate ones. The downtown one, I thought we were obliged with the shopping center, created a lot of vacancies in downtown, and I had in mind to let that be part of it, as long as the government was going to underwrite the cost, the federal government. But that one failed. I had envisioned, frankly, cleaning out the north, that two-block area, cleaning the north out, the buildings, cleaning those out, and letting them come to the south side in those two areas. Let that be, so people could then drive in, park their car. We'd have a little mini downtown. But that was defeated. Austin Hogan owned the Sears building, and there was a lot of controversy about tearing down the Sears building. But it was okay. I was happy with the flats area, and that passed overwhelmingly. So we went ahead. The problem I had was getting the Congress to appropriate the money. We did all the advance work, all the paperwork. Harold Hughes was our senator then, right. And we just weren't getting anywhere. So I called up. As we were in good terms. We may differ in our political affiliations. He tried to get me to join his, and I was too busy just being neutral. I said, don't get me involved in your lousy politics. So I called him, and I said, I need to come in and see you. And what about? I got to have the money for the urban renewal program. The people are, 6 or 7 years. These people are getting unsteady. And you can come on in. Give me a time to come in. And I took Herb and Ed with me. And they were on Hughes's political side politically.
Herb and Ed are your commissioners.
Yeah, Herb Conlon, who just died, and Ed Gillespie. I shouldn't have, but in retrospect, the three of us should not have been together. It should not have left, but we did anyway. So going in there, and Hughes has got this big, nice office, and the first thing he says to me was, and he always did, well, you said you got yourself in this blankety blank mess, now you expect me to get you out of it. And I said, yes, we're getting tired of Congress sitting on this thing. We need the money. And we talked, and he continued to give me a hard time. And it was getting late. And then he turned the other way, and he said, I hate to tell you guys, but you really should leave. It's getting dark, and you're going to have to go to your car, and we've had some problems in this particular area. And he was looking out for us there. And so we thanked him, and I let Ed and Herb go out, and Hughes came over and he says, don't worry about it, I'll get you the money in a couple months. Sure, shoot, in a couple of months, Congress acted, got us the urban renewal money, and yeah, and the rest is history. I attribute that to Hughes, and I think he was really a marvelous guy.
Interesting. Civil rights would have been another issue, and race relations here in Fort Dodge. Do you have any comments or observations about that?
Well, I'd be blindfolded if I didn't say that there was racial problems. I think that anyone in any public office that says that we don't have discriminatory problems is blind to facts. So yes, did we have any in Fort Dodge? No. I had an excellent relationship with Republicans and Democrats and white and blacks and Orientals. My door was open for everyone, and I refused to take sides in any political issue. Even when Jack Kennedy came to Fort Dodge, Don Mitchell was my city attorney, and also the Democrat National Committeeman. And he came in and said, "I'm going to have Jack Kennedy come. You want to be a part of it?" I said, "Yes, I want to be a part of it. And if Nixon comes, I want to be a part of it. I don't care. I'll not shut the door to anyone." So Jack Kennedy came into the Caroline. We had problems at the airport, which is another, if you want to hear about it, we'll talk about it later. But they came in and was with Eunice, landed, and it was a resolve on my part that I didn't care what political affiliations the candidate had, what religious belief he had. I wanted him to be welcome to our town, and I succeeded. I did. I think Harold Hughes I was as close to Harold Hughes as I was to Bob Ray, and I'm not saying that some of my friends was quite as overwhelmed with my attitude towards Governor Hughes, but I did what I thought was appropriate to the occasion, and it was a great relationship. But I think when Jack Kennedy came to town, Governor Lovelace, I don't know if you fellows remember Governor Lovelace? He was running for the Senate. Jack Kennedy and Lovelace were both in Sioux City. And Jack Kennedy told me he'd invited Lovelace to fly into Fort Dodge with him. Lovelace didn't want to. He wanted to come in his own plane. Well, I was okay. And I didn't know any of this, frankly, until the episode occurred. Well, Kennedy's plane got permission to land and landed here in Fort Dodge, and comes in and got a big, massive crowd, and people were all over the place, and we get up there and waiting for Lovelace. No, Herschel Lovelace didn't show up. Ed Brain was a big booster of Lovelace. Mm-hmm. Came over to me, "What are you doing?" I said, "What are you talking about, Ed? Lovelace, why isn't he able to land?" I said, "I have the slightest idea. Tell me more about what's going on." He says, "Lovelace is in Sioux City, and he can't land, and we don't want the program to start until he's here." I said, "Well, let me go over to the base to see what's going on." So we go over, and I get on the guys. "How come you haven't let the governor land?" He said, "Mayor, we don't have anything to do with it. It's out of Mason City. It's Mason City is saying who gets to land and not land here in Fort Dodge. We have nothing to do with it." And of course, then everybody backed up and retreated. And I said, "Well, there's your answer, Ed. he says, as far as I'm concerned, if my voice is worth anything, tell him to land. And the guy says, I can't do that. This is out of our territory. So we go ahead with Jack Kennedy, and I had the privilege of introducing him. And then he went down Central Avenue. When I got done, people came up, and the one party was, so gracious and actually thanked me for giving Kennedy such a good introduction. Well, the other party wasn't quite so happy with me, but they worked it out and got over it. And I have a nice little note from Jack Kennedy thanking me and saying that we Democrats have got to stick together. I don't know if I should tell this part, but by that time I think I chaired the Electoral College for State of Ohio.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, I don't know how it happened, but all of a sudden, yeah, I'm charged with the responsibility of casting our vote in 1960 for, it turned out, for Nixon carried Iowa that year, as you recall, Jack. And so I had to go to Des Moines and cast the ballot for Nixon. And but Herschel was still governor, and but he didn't succeed. I forget who defeated him. I remember it was Jack Miller. I don't remember. But anyway,
sounds right.
That turned out all right, and I still have the little letter from Jack Kennedy, which I cherish. Mm-hmm. He was so nice, so gracious, goodness gracious. Our little boy, he was just a little babe in arms at the time, and Kennedy had to hold Bob, and
is that right?
yeah, and then invited us into the Caroline, the plane. I think Eunice was with him, and gave us a tour of the plane, and was real gracious. Gosh, you couldn't help but like the guy.
Which has just one more political issue during your tenure as the mayor, and that has to do with the fact that those are the anti-war days. And you, as a veteran of some distinction, as I recall, having grown up here in Fort Dodge, you were the head of the draft board locally.
I was a member of the draft board for I forget how many years now, quite a few years before I went in. Let's see, I think I was still on the draft board and was the mayor. I think when I went on the bench, then I resigned from the draft board, yeah. Okay. But we had good help. We didn't have any real serious problems here. There wasn't any gathering, as I remember. You may remember better than me in that respect. I just don't remember any groups congregating, protesting the war. And if there was a group, it had to be a silent, a nonviolent group. Mm-hmm. But I don't remember any.
Okay. You might remember Father Ronald Nazer.
Yeah.
I think he was an anti-war priest at the time. And
at the time.
His sister was Pat McLeod, who was the clerk here.
Yeah.
All those years. So I do remember that part. All right. So you continued to practice law, and at some point you did become a district court judge. And can you describe for us how you decided that you wanted to be a district court judge?
Well, Art Braggington was resigning. So that created an opening. I think a few of the lawyers suggested it. I don't even know if they were serious. But then there were a couple of others that were interested in the judgeship. And I think, I'm not just sure, then I tossed my hat in. And the Webster County Bar then had 3 or 4 of us that were interested in the judgeship. And they met and they voted on who they would endorse. and they voted to endorse me. And then I guess then it was then to the nominating committee, and I was nominated, and then went to Bob Ray, and I was appointed. Yeah.
Was it very much the same selection process we have today, where the commission vets the candidates and sends two to the governor?
Yes.
Okay.
There was a previous occasion that I was nominated and was not appointed.
Okay.
Under the same process. I was appointed by Bob Ray at the second time of my application.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Do you recall anything? Did Governor Ray interview you before making the selection between you and the other, or did you already know each other so well?
I knew Bob real well. Yes, I was interviewed by him. I think by both times, on both occasions, I was interviewed by Bob. The first time, the first time he appointed Newt Draheim. Let me pick that up, because that would be the correct way. Yes, and then they came around when Braggington retired. Then the opening was created. I was endorsed once again, and then Bob Ray appointed me. Then I had the problem of closing down this law practice,
right.
and the additional problem of a good law practice to a judge's salary. In fact, when I got my first check as a judge, I called up. I can't think of her name now. I said, "Haven't you made a mistake?" She said, "No, we have to withhold this and this and this." And but no regrets. I'm happy that I made the right choice. Yeah. So the problem, of course, was shutting down the law office, and I had cases pending in federal court and state courts, and I farmed Don Kirsten, took some of the federals, and others. Yeah, I fired them out. The chief judge made a horrible mistake, but he happened to be in Fort Dodge, and Keith Richardson was the judge, and I was in getting some papers signed, and Keith introduced me to the chief, and I can't think of his name, was over in Waverly. Real fine man, good judge. But I had closed my office down, and he assigned me to, I had been appointed, and he assigned me to a case in Humboldt. I said, "Well, I'm still in closing my office, Judge." And he said, "Oh, it doesn't matter. I want you to go over there and take this case." Well, I did the one, but I wouldn't. I said, I sent word I don't want to get at odds with anybody, but it just isn't quite right. You can't expect me to have my law practice going on one side, and then the next day as a judge. That doesn't seem to me somewhat inconsistent. So they then recognized my problem, but I think they've changed the procedure now. Don't they give you 30 days or something like that
I think there is some period
to close your office down? Or I think it's probably mandated that you do so.
Yeah.
But I have absolutely no regrets whatsoever.
At the time that you became a district court judge, had the reorganization of the state court system already taken place? You were appointed to District 2B, or were you part of the old 16th or whatever we were?
I was appointed to judge a two-way, I was appointed a judge to the second judicial district.
Right.
But that didn't limit me, because I went to McGivern one day, and who was the Chief Justice, and I said, I read every now and then that judges are disqualifying themselves because of controversies or conflicts of interest. And I said, I just want you to know that I'm available, and I have no problems going to other districts. And this was after about my 10th year, and I was ready for something different. So, yeah, McGivern then sent me up to Sioux City and other places. I don't know if I wanted it. wanted to go. That was kind of a welcome change, yeah.
I assume that there's a process that one has to go through to acclimate to the job of being a judge. I mean, all of a sudden you're not an advocate, you're the impartial decider, and I'm sure you're exposed to a whole range of cases that maybe don't fit neatly within your prior practice. How did that transition take place for you?
It wasn't very difficult. Obviously, I was born and raised here, knew all the lawyers, so it was kind of easy for me to disqualify myself from cases where I knew either the litigants or the lawyers. Or I don't know that I had any problems transition-wise. Once I got settled into the judge's office and the procedure itself. And it was different than the fast movements that we had to make as lawyers, and the judges where you took your time. No, it was a good fit except in one instance, and I was almost resigned because I was assigned to juvenile work.
Oh.
And I didn't like juvenile work, and I didn't. It was not one of my dreams. It wasn't anything that I had thought that I wanted to spend my life doing juvenile work, and I didn't think I was making any contribution at all to the legal profession. And Judge Kelly, remember Judge Kelly, found out about it. That I think somehow he saw something in or someone saw something in the code as to how you got out of office. And Kelly, he lost his voice box. He just chewed me, and he was chair of the nominating committee. We worked like blankety blank blank, get you nominated. What's this I hear about you're going to resign? I said, well, I'm not sure that I ever thought I was going to resign, but I'm tempted. I don't want to spend my life in the judicial system doing a juvenile work. It doesn't fit. And well, he said, we don't want you to resign. I went to all this work to get you appointed now, and went on and on and on. Well, eventually they changed the system and appointed juvenile judges. And then I was happy. But I came pretty close to resigning, only because it didn't fit. It wasn't a fit for me. I didn't think that I would spend my life doing that.
Sure.
I preferred more the other work, the trial work, and doing things that were, to me, were. I don't mean juvenile isn't.
Right.
I just wasn't fit for it.
Right, I understand that.
Sometimes I'd choke up sometimes the way parents would treat their kids, and I had one juvenile case that I had to sentence the young kid, I think, to Eldora, and I got the mom and dad sitting back there, and I was at a restaurant out here a month or so later, and the dad came up. I looked real. I thought he was real mad at me. Came up and shook my hand and said, "I want to thank you, Judge." Wow. I says, "How's that?" "I want to thank you that you did something no other judge would do. The boy needs to discipline, and I have not been able to do so." I was with a friend, and I breathed a sigh of relief. And that was one.
Right.
Another time, I was sued as a juvenile judge, and the guy sued me, and he started out as figures 5, and it ran out of zeros and went down here. And just an endless line and he wasn't very happy with something. I don't even know that I had anything to do with it, but I gave it to the Attorney General, and they took care of it. The fellow, he turned out to be kind of a pest. We had one incident that I met him at the post office, and I didn't know it, but I knew he was there, and he put his hand on my shoulder, And I turned around and I backed him up against we had those mailboxes.
Yes.
Post out there. Can't you ever put your hand on me? You can argue with me all you want. I want to sue you. I said, you could sue me, you've sued me, but don't put your hand on me. I'm telling you for the last time. And he backed away and he didn't, yeah.
Wow.
But I don't know what they ever did with him.
Do you recall any particularly memorable cases that you handled as a trial court judge? Whether they be murder cases or significant cases that changed the law? Or...
Well, I don't. The case doesn't have any other meaning. I presided over a case in Carroll County, and he's either the plaintiff's lawyer or defendant's lawyer. The case was submitted, and they were submitting instructions, and he submitted instructions on comparative fault for the first time. This was before McCormick's decision on comparative fault. And he wanted me to instruct it on it. And it looked good. I said, I really don't think I can do that until the Supreme Court tells me that it is permissible. And that's when you had just contributory fault. I remember that, but I don't remember. I presided on criminal cases, malpractice, medical malpractice, dental malpractice that I directed a verdict out. Malpractice suit where the doctor was horribly negligent. Wasn't much question. It was a jury question. Jury only gave her $200,000. The defense lawyer paid it the next day, and plaintiff picked it up.
Judge, I know at some point you became an appellate judge, but before leaving your career as a trial court judge, I guess I would ask you, what were the things particularly you liked or disliked about the trial court bench?
I didn't care for the juvenile work.
Right.
I can't think of anything that I disliked.
The interaction with lawyers is probably different.
My interaction with lawyers was tremendous, and with my fellow judges, and the friendship that developed with my colleagues on the bench has lasted forever. Russ Hill, who went to the federal bench, bankruptcy bench, still a good friend. We were together down at George Fagg's memorial. George Fagg and Dave Hansen. We were all good friends. Had excellent relationship with my fellow judges, and as I say, it's lasted for an awful long time. George, of course, is deceased now. Went to the federal bench. Dave Hansen went first to the federal district court, then to the Court of Appeals. Good friend. Russ Hill, we were all together here. He went to the bankruptcy court, and then I went to the Court of Appeals. They all went to the federals, and which probably I have no regrets, but they were. Answer your question. We developed a real close relation, the four of us, and we used to have. I think the last time we were together, George Fagg was still alive, and we met in, I don't know where it's Des Moines or at a restaurant somewhere. I don't recall just where we, and Paul Hellwich joined us, Judge Hellwich. I had a good one. And with the lawyers, I guess we remained friends. We didn't nothing socially. I think probably always fearful of someone suggesting that because I had lunch with lawyer Jones that I would never be able to be impartial. So I don't think I think I purposely avoided that, but attended all the bar functions, however, and and we always had a good time. In fact, we had one not too long ago here, and the lawyers surprised me. With a little ceremonial at the party, which was out at golf course bar. That you know, and I think the lawyers, now Mark Cady, I think was my law clerk. But even then, when you were my law clerk for years, and I would say that I had a good relationship. I let the lawyers judge me rather than my trying to judge them.
So let's talk about your decision to apply for an appellate judgeship. How did that come about?
Well, strange as it may seem, I was interested in the law. One thing I liked about being a judge was learning the law. It was fun for me, or interesting for me at least, to get the legal problem and to be able to do my research and resolve the problem. That I like with the help of you and others, the law clerks. I think I was getting burned out as a trial judge. I just felt it at times that it was losing some of the interest that I originally had, and the appellate bench looked. That was something that I really wanted. And there were openings on the Supreme Court, and I was nominated twice and turned down twice.
Okay.
So, and then, as you know, it's a lot of work to get nominated and appointed. I mean, maybe some of the judges that were better known in the district than I was. Maybe they didn't have to go through what I did, but I had to visit each of the members of the nominating committee. And they were, as you know, were scattered all over the state of Iowa.
Sure.
I did that twice for the Supreme Court, and as I said, and I was nominated, but not appointed. Well, then there was the opening on the Court of Appeals. And I frankly, one of the few times I talked things over with my wife as to what to do about the bench, because she usually left that to me, and I pretty well resolved. Now I didn't want to go through the work after being rejected twice, and I didn't want to go through it. Well, this lawyer, I won't tell you who it is, I may tell you afterwards, but the called me up and said, "Why haven't you applied to the Court of Appeals? It's opening there." Oh, so Don, I don't want to go through this again, and it's an awful lot of work. He said, "Well, I think you should." So I did, and I applied, and I don't remember going around. Dave Harris was the chair, and I'm not sure that I may have seen one or two, but not for any great distance. Well, I was nominated and appointed to the Court of Appeals. That was on the first one there. And then I was quite content. I enjoyed the work on the Court of Appeals because once again it involved research, research and study, and I enjoyed that very much. And the guys and gals I worked with were real top-notch people, and it was a good occasion.
Which governor appointed you?
Branstad appointed me to the Court of Appeals.
And again, that happened in about, what, 1987 or so?
I think 85, when
Can't remember.
somewhere around 85.
In your work on the Court of Appeals, I mean, you mentioned that it was more research-oriented maybe, and certainly it wasn't the trial work, but other differences between being an appellate judge and a trial judge?
Of the two, if on the same day, they offered me the district court judge or the appellate judge, I take the appellate judge. There's more writing and more research involved in that, and learning the fundamentals of the law. It's a good place to do it in areas that you don't know anything about. So yeah, and I enjoyed that part. I enjoyed I think the association with other judges on the trial bench. I think that was good. But I think the appellate bench of the two I enjoyed much more.
Could you describe for us a little more how panels are chosen and how cases are assigned and so forth?
Well, I don't know what it's like now, but we would hear oral arguments, and then we would all on a given, we'd all recess in. I don't remember now how in the world if the chief judge assigned cases. I don't. For some reason, my mind is blank on how we did it. If we did it by lot, I don't know that there was any specific way. But
for oral argument, you sat in 3 judge panels, is that right? Mm-hmm. And when you joined the Court of Appeals, how many judges were on the Court of Appeals?
there were 5 of us then.
Just 5 then, okay. And I assume, how was a case determined to be worthy of oral argument? Because as the Court of Appeals, you're trying to do.
I think we gave oral arguments in almost all instances. Very, very few times would we, at least during my term, would we not grant oral arguments. No, if the lawyers went to all that work to putting briefs together, my opinion was always we at least owe them the accord to grant them the opportunity to be heard. We ought not to systematically or arbitrarily say, oh, we don't want to hear what you've got to say. So I don't ever remember, frankly, just deciding a case without oral arguments.
With a caseload as heavy as the Court of Appeals caseload, did you always have the time to actually read the briefs before an argument, or would somebody be assigned to read the briefs for that case and you for the next case?
We would have time to read the cases over, yes. And then we then had to decide if the cases were ready for oral arguments, and then we would set them down. I think, I'm not sure if we gave criminal cases priority or not. I just don't recall. But whatever the system was, it worked. Now, we were way behind. In fact, when I retired, we were really behind. And I talked with McGivern, the Chief Justice, about staying on. He wanted me to stay on for the other, I don't know, 6 or 7 years as a senior judge. But yes, when I went on the court, we were really way behind.
Okay.
And it wasn't because of non-work. It was the schedule was there, and the cases were coming in pretty fast. But no case, in my recollection, was ever treated lightly. Mm-hmm. Once again, and maybe that's because I was practiced law for so many years, that if you take time and give all of the effort, you at least should enjoy the courtesy of being heard. And so I think every case that ever came was a serious case as far as I was concerned.
Did you find the oral arguments to be helpful in your consideration of the cases?
I did, and particularly during the question and answer period. I think the oral arguments were real helpful, particularly reading the briefs on one side and the briefs on the other side. Sometimes I might even ask, well, you have this and you have this, how do you reconcile this? No, I found oral arguments to be real helpful, yes.
Did you actively engage in questioning?
Yes, yeah, I would, yes. I was real cautious. I didn't want to offend the lawyer. I didn't want to, most of all, I didn't want to put him on the spot. My questions were always pertained to his brief, and there may be something in it that needed a little more work on, and we were courteous to the lawyers. Yeah.
And having expressed that opinion and that practice, does it strike you curious that Justice Thomas on the U.S. Supreme Court does not ask questions?
It's strange, to say the least. Yeah. It's strange, and now why? But I think he did answer, didn't it, not too long ago?
Just recently.
Finally, after 10 years or so. Well, I thought it somewhat strange, but they live in a little world of their own anyway. So.
When it came to writing decisions, do you recall how that was assigned?
I would write decisions. My law clerk, if I had a law clerk, I'd tell him what I wanted, and he would do the research work necessary to strengthen what I would say should be in the opinion, yes.
But how often would a panel be unanimous or be divided?
I think we were unanimous. And it's strictly guess, 75% of the time, 80%, yeah.
And if you were unanimous, of the three of you, how was it determined that you would write the opinion as opposed to someone else?
Well, that was already, that was decided when we met, and the cases were divided up or distributed.
Oh, even before the argument?
Yeah.
You knew that you were
We knew, yeah.
Okay. Did you frequently write dissents?
Yes. I had no hesitation writing dissents. If I didn't believe in the majority, I would write my own dissent. I think I think one dissent, I know the attorney was a criminal lawyer, and he finally got our court to reverse, and I dissented in that. He told me later he was flabbergasted. I finally got a reversal after several hundred appeals, and you dissent. Well, I just thought the trial judge was right. That's all.
Sure.
I'll tell you who it is later.
Okay. You mentioned law clerks a couple of times, and I think the process might be of interest to people who hear this. How does a judge go about selecting a law clerk?
Well, I think the potential law clerk expresses the interest first, that he or she is interested in becoming a law clerk. We then want, if we need a law clerk and he or she makes at least a good presentation, then we would want to see what he or she has done in the past, how he or she rated in law school. Those are all important factors that at least I took into consideration, and made the selection there. I think I was more interested in the individual himself, not like Jim Benzoni. Everybody knows Jim was indicted twice for murder down in Oklahoma or somewhere like that. And he applied, and he came in and he confessed, I just want you to know now that I was indicted for murder, and curiosity got to us. What happened? And he told me what happened, that he was going through the southern part of the United States in a white robe and barefooted and this sort of thing.
Oh.
And that there happened to be a dual murder in this town that he was in, and for some reason they thought he was the guy that did the murdering, and so the county attorney arrested him, put him in jail, and indicted him 2 counts of murder. And so Jim calls his dad, and this is Jim telling me this, incidentally, that called his dad and said, I wasn't in town that day. I was hitchhiking, got a ride with this trucker. And Jim knew the trucking firm and the trucker. And he told this to his dad, so his dad puts a detective on it and finds this truck driver and the trucker, who said, well, yeah, I remember him. I picked him up in his town, and he was with me. So the county attorney had to release him. I was more interested. Now, Jim was at either the top of his class or pretty close to it. And I said, well, I'm only interested in what you've been doing scholastically. Mm-hmm. And so I hired him. Yeah, I hired him, my law clerk. And we've remained pretty close friends since then.
And does each appellate judge have one law clerk?
Let's see. Now, on the trial bench, mm-hmm. you were a law clerk to several judges. Right. On the appellate level, yeah, we had one law clerk, right.
And do law clerks normally serve for just 1 year?
Normally 1 year. They can apply for a second year if they want to. Most of them prefer to move on. But we had no set rule. You can only serve for 1 year. No.
Sure. And you had indicated before how you work with a law clerk. You would explain sort of what your conclusion is and direct some writing, and then, but how else would you, can you fill that out more for us?
Well, we would talk back and forth if there was something that maybe he or she didn't understand, didn't understand what the position was that I was taking and why. We would have conferences, and I would either finish it on the appellate level or send it back and say, see what you can, why don't you incorporate this? Doesn't read right, something like that. Mm-hmm.
Do you recall any particularly significant cases that you would have been part of the panel deciding while you were on the Court of Appeals?
One, and I can't even tell you the case, and I don't recall the issue, but the Supreme Court had already, the issue had already been before the Supreme Court. It was a divided court, and there was a good majority opinion, good dissent opinion. And then the issue came back to us again. That one I did, trying to not offend anybody, but I forget which way I went on it. I wrote it. I wrote the opinion. It encompassed both of the issues as presented, and I'm not just sure how it came about. I got the unanimous consent of my colleagues to the opinion, and then I went to appeal to the Supreme Court from my decision, but my best recollection is it was set back and told to publish it. And I wish I could remember. I might be able to find something in my file. That's one of a number of decisions that I wrote that some were published, some were not published. Mm-hmm. But that one, I think, there were 2 or 3 others maybe that...
At some point you became the chief judge of the Court of Appeals.
Yeah.
How did that come about?
Barney Donaldson was our chief, and Barney was horribly sick. And we kept him as chief, as you know. In fact, Maynard Haynard and I went up to see Barney when he was so ill. Do you fellas remember Barney at all? Barney Donaldson. Well, Barney was real sick, and Maynard, Judge Hayden and I went up to see him. And just to see how he was. And he kind of got tears in his eyes. Oh, he said, I thought you were going to ask me to resign. So, Barney, we wouldn't do that. No, we want you to stay on as the chief, even though he couldn't come. He was so sick at the end. And we just wanted to come up and see how you were. We had a pretty good group of guys. And
how did your duties change then, as the chief judge, as opposed to just being?
Well, as the chief judge, and you were in charge with the administrative aspects of the court, the getting the cases out and getting them assigned to judges, and or getting them assigned to so they get to the right to get to judges. We tried to give everybody, and again, I wish I could remember how we did do that. I'll have to find out. But the chief had the administrative responsibilities of the court itself. And
in your tenure on the Court of Appeals, were you in the new judicial building in Des Moines?
No. I sat once but, as a senior judge, but then only as a matter of courtesy. I forget who was the chief, rather insisted that I come and see our new chambers, and was gracious of him. And I came and I listened to oral arguments, but the attorneys were advised in advance that I'd be sitting, but I would not be deciding. And so that, just one time at the new building. That was Laverado's baby.
Yeah.
That was Laverado's baby, yeah.
So when you heard oral arguments, you heard them in the old Supreme Court chambers in the Capitol?
Yeah.
Okay. Where did you office?
We officed across the hall from those chambers. We had an office there. My office was a little bigger than a room closet. It was an office, and it worked all right.
And you've always been able to maintain an office here in the Webster County Courthouse?
Webster County's been good to me, yes. I had an office down the hall. Webster County's real good to me, and they let me keep my office even when I was a senior judge, and just as a matter of courtesy.
What was the impact, if any, frankly, of the Supreme Court vacating a decision of the Court of Appeals?
None.
None, really? I didn't know if somehow you felt, well, they're second-guessing us, or...
No, I never heard anyone complain. As a matter of fact, I don't know if you remember, Ed Breen had that "It Seems to Me."
Oh, I do indeed.
Remember that? Well, I started a little one of my own, "It Seems to Me," trying to document the cases that went up to the Supreme Court and they were reversed by the Supreme Court. And I started doing that, but then it took too much time, and I quit doing it. And my colleagues on the bench weren't that interested, so I just stopped doing it. Yeah.
Judge, I know in the Northwest Second Reporter, they did report and publish the proceedings of your retirement ceremony from the Court of Appeals. And I recall in the book there is a very attractive photograph of you in your robe. Where is that photograph now? Is it yours, or is it in the courts? Is it in Des Moines?
I have one. No, I have the big one that. Remember Howard Haas from the House?
Yes.
Yeah, Howard was a real close friend of our family. In fact, he was I think a member of our family with my brother Haas and his wife, and Howard was a good friend of Bill, and
Sure.
but Howard did that, and I have the large portrait at home.
As you sit here retired, what do you think of the mandatory retirement requirement for judges?
On the United States Supreme Court?
No, here in Iowa.
Well, I think it's. I didn't like it, but I think it's all right. Yes. I think it's 80, isn't it, or 70? Where is it? No, senior judge at 80.
I think it's 72.
72. 72. I think it's all right. I didn't like it, and I didn't want to go, and I stayed on the senior judge. But in retrospect, I think it's good for the court, And I think it's good for the judge, yes, to get out. You got to get out sometime, so get out.
As you know, there was a probate judge in Polk County who retired at the age of 90.
At 90?
Mm-hmm. I think there was a special exception created for her.
I want to be careful how I answer.
Yeah, that's right.
I'm 90 years old. So.
Did you have experience, and do you have any thoughts to share with us about having cameras in the courtroom?
I permitted it when you had to have the consent. I permitted it. I saw nothing wrong with it, frankly. As long as it didn't interrupt the proceedings itself, and I cautioned them, as long as you don't interrupt the proceedings, you're more than welcome. So I did permit.
I assume that electronic filing had not come in at the time that you were on the court?
No, and I know it hadn't, and I don't understand it. Even after I got out, I was up with my nephew and I practiced the law, and I don't understand the electronic. And as I understand it, if the chief judge can make exceptions if exceptions are necessary. I didn't ever ask for any, but yeah.
Another thing that I observed when I read through the retirement proceedings is that you thanked your court reporters. And could you describe for us the relationship that a judge has with the court reporter and what that reporter's role is?
I think it has to be a real compatible relationship with your court reporter, because they are called upon time after time to do tasks that is after quitting hours for others. A good court reporter is essential for a judge to do his work properly. And that I had two good court reporters, excellent. I turned down some court reporters that wanted to go to work for me. One to work for Braggington. He applied, but he spent the first 10 minutes telling me what a lousy judge Braggington was, and how unfair he was. So it didn't take long to cross him off the list. Yeah, no, I think good reporters, I think everyone will agree with, all judges would agree, you got to have a good court reporter. Yeah.
And another observation I made as I reviewed that proceeding is that you had invited Alfredo Parrish to come speak at your ceremony, and you explained to him why, and I just wanted to ask you about that again.
Well, Alfredo, if you read it, was right. I never did agree with anything. In fact, that one time that the Court of Appeals ruled in his favor, I dissented, because I thought the trial judge was right. I always kind of liked Alfredo as a lawyer, and I thought I needed some diversity. Maybe someone would be critical of me, and so I called Mark and asked Mark. I don't know Alfredo that well, but I see that he's never been asked. See if he wants to come, and I tell him he can say what he wants to say. And so that was the reason I did invite him, and you can see what he said. He was a surprise.
It was a surprise. But I think you said in your comments during the proceedings that everyone knows of the work of the county attorney or the attorney general, and many times, and how critical it is to the system of justice, that there needs to be good defense attorneys who will stand up for people. And I thought that was a...
Well, yes, and that was one of the other reasons why, one reason why I asked him to. Maybe it wasn't correct on my part. I think maybe one of my colleagues thought maybe I went too far. Under our judicial system, prosecutors are prosecutors. Defense lawyers are defense lawyers. They have a job to do, each of them. and we ought not to magnify one over the other when they're doing their tasks as they have to do them. I tried to explain to one of my colleagues, now just listen to me a little bit. You know, we wouldn't have the very questions that protect the liberties that we now have are in being because of defense lawyers. You wouldn't have the Cisco cases now that we have, the cases that come down and said these are the defendant's rights. You were wrong in denying it. Well, who raises the issue but defense lawyers? And that was my position. I'm not favoring them, I'm just telling you. Without them, individual liberties wouldn't come into being as they are unless you waited for the Iowa or the legislature or the Congress to develop them. And they've got other things to do. They don't care about those. Even though they're set out in the Constitution, they're not. They've got other things. And defense lawyers, some of them are shady and shouldn't be before the courts. But we know them. I think we pretty well know who are sincere and who is just trying to pull strings. And I felt that way. And although I confess my one colleague didn't quite agree with it. He thought I went a little too far. Yeah. I don't remember what my comments were now.
Yeah, it's very much along the lines that you just stated.
Yeah. But am I so wrong in that approach? I didn't think so at the time. And Alfredo was, I agreed with his right to come in and advance his theories. But that doesn't mean that I have to agree with his conclusions. No, that's for me to do. And but no, I did it, and I'm proud of it. I did notice later on some of the other retiring judges used Alfredo.
Oh, they have done that?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
I don't know the fellow that I did, but he filled the one spot that I thought I needed to explain how did I feel about this particular subject. Mm-hmm. And if you think about it long enough, I may be wrong in some respects, but in theory, I think that I'm correct.
So, Judge, I don't know when we'll have an opportunity to show this recording to someone who might be thinking about becoming a lawyer, but I'm just wondering if you have any advice for some young person who's looking at a career in the law.
I think the legal profession is an honored profession. I wish that my son would be a lawyer, but he didn't want to be. I think now, more than ever, and I know I'm 90 years old and I'm not as fluent in presentations as I was before, but I think lawyers must play the role in assuring that we have an independent judiciary, not subject to political bickering. I would be naive to question you fellas, because you know what I'm talking about. You know that Congress, for some reason, is trying, or not trying, they're doing it, turning our top court in the United States into a political arena. And it's wrong. And if I were a professor in a law school, I think the thing I would tell the young lawyer, the young student that aspires to be a lawyer, if you don't do anything else in the law, at least preach the need for the judicial system to be independent of the other two branches of government. That we do not need Congress to tell us how we should be running our courts. If we are the third branch of government, we're not the third branch constitutionally, but we are one of the three branches. And we ought to be not, I hesitate to use the word humiliated, but the United States Supreme Court, or any Supreme Court, ought not to be degraded by inserting political influence. I believe that. I know I'm naive to think that it's going to stop, but you gentlemen are old enough to know when we did the appointments and we didn't have all of this bickering politically. I don't know if I'm a conservative judge or a liberal judge, and I hope I think there was something that came down in I don't know what that paper is in Des Moines that I was a conservative judge, but I've never known whether I was conservative or liberal. I believed in the Constitution, but if they're going to be political, at least I wish to be quiet about it. It's almost an obscenity to do it the way they're doing. I think that if I were in law school and trying to tell young students of the law, always remember that the judiciary must be independent. We're fortunate in Iowa that we have this, and it's not true in some states, and we all know it. But it's wrong, but I don't think you're going to ever correct it as long as politicians continue to, in some respects, make a mockery of our judicial system.
And Judge, along the same lines, for all the years that you've served the judiciary, and for all the other judges that you have known, what would you say to an attorney, young, old, mid-career, whatever, who aspires to the bench? What advice would you give them?
Remember that you are to always remain impartial. That you were selected as a judge, an honor that is not bestowed upon many individuals, because of your legal ability that you have displayed, and because you are willing to fulfill those duties and obligations that are an inherent part of the judicial system itself. If you can't sit on the bench and be impartial, get off of it. Don't sit. It's better to recluse yourself than to sit with your mind already made up. No. Have I done it? Yes. Have I been asked to remove myself? Yes. After all, I was born and raised here in Webster County, and I know the litigants. Yes. And I said, you're right. Even if you didn't ask me to, I was going to withdraw anyway.
Well, Judge, thank you very much. It's a great personal honor for me.
I have enjoyed it very much. The honor is mine.
Okay, now stay there a minute. We have a little ceremony.